Hello, and welcome to Saturday Soundbites. I'm your host, Veronica Sofer, and I'm thrilled to be with you for another phenomenal episode where we talk all things visibility strategy. We're talking about marketing, advertising, branding, networking, public relations, my favorite part, and how all these things come together to grow your brand. Here at Saturday Soundbites, we know that there's a lot of different ways we can share our products and our services, but really it's about sharing your story. And that's why we bring guests on who help us put all those things together so that we can grow our visibility strategy, share our story, and do what it is we're supposed to do for the world. So with that, I'm going to get us moving. If you are listening on the podcast, make sure you hit subscribe. We want to make sure that you don't miss any episode of Saturday Soundbites when they are dropped. And if you're watching on Facebook, drop us some comments so we can pop in and engage with you and know where you are watching from. And if you catch the replay, hashtag replay so we can go back and connect. Let me bring on a phenomenal guest that I'm very excited about. Miss Charmaine Hammond is joining us to Saturday Soundbites. Welcome.
Good morning, Veronica. Really excited for this conversation with you today.
As am I. I saw your content and I realized we hadn't talked about this unique way of growing our visibility strategy. And I like how you have really taken it on and been able to incorporate how sponsorships, collaborations, partnerships, all really important words in growing your business, really make a difference in all the different spaces. So I'm just thrilled that we're going to be able to chat today. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my first career was completely different from what I do today. I was a jail guard. I started my career working in jails as a correctional officer, so knew nothing about sponsorship, and collaboration in the jail system is really about keeping you safe. And then I left the government, started working for nonprofits. That is where I started to learn about sponsorship. It was a big part of my job to find money to keep the organization afloat. And then fast forward, I took a different job, and that job was as a sponsor. I worked for government, and my job was providing local organizations with grant money, sponsorship, and funding. And I was giving away about 2.5 million a year. And it was my job to determine with the team how the funds were allocated. And I learned so much. I wish I actually had the jobs in reverse. It would have been very helpful to have that job first.
Sure.
And then fast forward, I opened my first business 25 years ago, and everything I learned about sponsorship and collaboration, I took with me into my business. And I have been a sponsor. I have secured sponsorship for my business, my projects, as well as my clients. And that's how I got started into it. And, the one thread, Veronica, that's woven through all of this is all about relationship. And one of your favorite words, visibility.
That's right.
Yeah,
absolutely. And relationships are key because even if someone isn't looking for your services or your product, or if you're in the nonprofit space, they may know people who are called to the work that you're doing, and they can connect you. And I tell people all the time, it's about connectedness and networking. So I love that you said that. You mentioned nonprofits. Do you feel like nonprofits are the biggest beneficiaries of some of these dollars, or do you feel like that's something any company can tap into?
Well, the interesting part of that question, I'm so glad that you asked it, is that many of the big brands actually have two purses. So if we think of big companies like banks and insurance and businesses that have multiple locations in your country or in your region or even in your community, like grocery stores, the bigger the brand, the more likely that it is that they have two purses. One that they call a philanthropic purse, which is where they provide sponsorship and donations to nonprofits and charities, service clubs, and community groups. Then there's another purse, which is the purse that I fall under. You would fall under this as well. And that's the purse of marketing. If you think about a big business, they set aside marketing dollars just like we do as entrepreneurs and small businesses. And they're spending that money on traditional media, magazine articles, costs of going to trade shows, digital campaigns, Facebook ads, all of that. And many of them have a line item in that budget for sponsorship. And that's the dollar, the purse that we're tapping into, Veronica, as entrepreneurs and small businesses. And a lot of entrepreneurs and small businesses make an assumption when they hear the word sponsorship. They say, that's just for charities and nonprofits. And I'm here to tell you, you can tap into that marketing budget. It is a marketing relationship. Sponsorship, from the small business and entrepreneur side and perspective, sponsorship is a marketing relationship. So that company, that brand, is looking for some kind of ROI. You mentioned that word earlier, ROI, return on impact or return on investment. And it isn't an investment like where they invest in you and you pay it back, but they're looking for some kind of recognition or some kind of support in their objectives from a marketing perspective by partnering and collaborating with you.
That's amazing. And that is true. I think most people automatically hear sponsorship and they think nonprofit. So
Yes.
how could, let's just make up a scenario, and if this isn't a good one, tell me.
Okay.
Let's talk about maybe a coach,
Yes.
a coach, someone in the coaching space. What would that look like for someone who's in that space who wants to connect with a corporation and tap into some of those sponsorship dollars?
Awesome. The first element, and this is where it gets really exciting, and probably your listeners will start thinking in a couple of minutes, "Oh, that could work for me." My first 40 sponsors were all what we call in-kind sponsors, which means there was no cash, Veronica. There was no check being sent over. It was all in kind. What did that look like? All of my clothing was sponsored for a number of years. I didn't pay for hairstyles, massages, makeup. When I would go on media and I'd stop over at the stylist, they would do up my hair, my makeup, and get me ready for the TV performance. I didn't pay for printing. I didn't pay for a lot of my travel costs. I even had my dog poop bags sponsored and my
I
dog
love
food.
it.
And my business is not about a dog, just so you all know that. And that's how creative we can be. So one of the first steps is to look at, for a coach, to look at what are all the things that I spend money on. A great way to do this is walk around your home and office and look at your Visa bills to see where you were spending money. That is the first place to start. When I did that exercise, I looked at my Visa bills and where I was spending money. I'm spending money on clothing. I'm spending money on makeup and hair. I'm spending money on massages, spending money on my dog. I'm spending on travel and printing and standing banners for trade show presentations that I do, spending money on envelopes and office supplies. And when you create that list, the next step for that coach is then to think, what would be great if I could get it sponsored? And who do I know already that could be that sponsor? In the case of the clothing, I went to the place where I buy 80% of my clothing, and I talked with her about finding a collaboration together. I didn't even mention the word sponsorship. I just said to Glenda, I'd love to be able to collaborate in some way. You love being in front of audiences with women. I speak and train audiences of many women. And she said, I should just sponsor all your clothing, Charmaine. And I said, okay.
Perfect.
Perfect. What does that look like? And that's how a coach, even a podcast host, can start to look at the same thing. So I'll give you an example of a podcast host. We had a podcast host who also had a radio show, and she was saying she was getting tired of she was using virtual backgrounds and wasn't happy with how they were showing up on videos. And after a conversation that she and I had in one of our coaching sessions, I said, well, what do you want your backdrop to look like? And she described it. And I said, well, who sells that kind of furniture? And she said, oh, there's a furniture store literally 5 minutes from my house. I love going in there. I take selfies every time I'm in there on their lovely furniture. And I said, well, why don't you go have a conversation? Now, she actually was going to do some of her shows, start them earlier and record in the store. They were going to help her set up all the equipment. And then she thought, oh, I know. And then she thought, well, I need something at home too, because I don't always have the opportunity to be able to travel down to the store, even though it's a few minutes away. So they actually furnished her office, and they swap out the furniture every 6 months, I think. So she's got the whole office is her studio that's been sponsored in kind by the furniture store.
That's amazing. That's a wonderful, wonderful idea. So when we talked about, when we were promoting the show and we talked about sponsorship and collaboration, I didn't realize collaboration could look like this. And you definitely got me excited. I am not a coach. But you got me excited because I know a lot of the coaches who tune into the show, and that's exactly the kinds of things we need to be doing. So you talked about, that's how you kind of got started, and those were some initial ideas, and there wasn't a cash exchange, but I got the impression that there was then more to come.
There was, that's right. The reason we want to start looking at some of those in-kind sponsorships and dealing with people that you know, like the first 40 sponsors, all of those people were people that I know and have done business with. I started there because when I started going to bigger companies and talking about how sponsorship could look in a cash or cash and in kind perspective, it helped me having these other brands behind me. It didn't matter if it was a local coffee shop or a big chain store. When I started approaching sponsors, their comment was, wow, you're working with a lot of other partners. Wow, you've got experience doing this. So it made them feel, I think, that the risk of partnering and collaborating with me was reduced because I understood how this worked. And obviously other brands had said yes. So the assumption could be made, maybe she knows what she's doing, which I do. And then how the cash sponsorship started, I'm going to give an example because I find it's always easier if we can wrap it around something.
Absolutely.
About 6 years ago, I decided to go on a Million Acts of Kindness tour. I was promoting one of my new books, which is about my dog, Toby. If you hear Toby, it's my dog. And I needed to have an innovative way to get the book out there. And I really wanted to secure a lot of media. So, in the work, Veronica, that you do in PR, how important that is. And it can be really hard to get in a
Yeah.
number of locations because the media says, you've already been in 5 other cities. What's going to be new? So we
Right.
we had to create something new. Long story short, we did a 7-week tour across North America, 14,000 kilometers, which is 10,000 miles, in a sponsored motorhome for 7 weeks. The motorhome was sponsored. We had sponsors. We did a lot of presentations for schools because one of my books is for children. And we had a lot of banks, actually, banks and credit unions that were sponsoring the presentation for me to go into the school. Essentially, they were covering the cost of my speaking fee, and they were covering the cost of purchasing a lot of my books in bulk quantities to give to their schools. And then, isn't that awesome?
I have to stop you because my mind is exploding, and I'm sitting here thinking that is brilliant. It's brilliant, especially because I have a passion for the K-12 space. People know that
Oh,
who listen to the show. But tell me more, because this is exactly how people that don't have experience with marketing and public relations struggle with, how do I get my book out there? So when you said
right.
book, I knew people were going to jump in. So keep going.
Well, and I love what you just raised because I know how important visibility is to you. It's a word that you use a lot. You're an expert in that area. Imagine this. Let's take one of the examples. So I'm in a community. I arranged in advance for this bank that I've never dealt with, didn't have a relationship, had never been in the doors, but I started building the relationship. As soon as we had that tour route, I started reaching out to banks in that community saying that we're doing this tour. Here's the goals of the tours, the outcome. Our goal is to get in front of X number of schools to inspire them to do kindness in their schools, families, and communities. We have a way of getting involved through sponsoring a presentation and books, and they loved it. But here's where the visibility piece comes in. Now I have me marketing my book and my tour. I have the school marketing my book and the tour. It's going home in newsletters. Order forms for books are going home in newsletters. The school is putting it on their social media. Now we have the bank who has said yes to sponsor the presentation. They've got a poster up in the bank with me and my book cover. They are sending out information to their banking, their membership audience, their social media posting that they're a happy sponsor of this. Now my visibility has tripled because of that partnership and collaboration. And one of the things that you know and your audience knows already is that we have to be visible and to be marketing effectively our products and our services. We have to be reaching an audience that's bigger than our own, because eventually our Facebook fans and our Twitter followers, they think, oh, there she is again promoting her book. They tune it out.
Right.
And we have to get in front of other people's audiences. And that is what collaboration and sponsorship does. It gets you in front of OPA, other people's audiences.
I love it. That is so brilliant. And And as you were talking through it, it's absolutely what professional speakers do, what
Mhm.
professional authors do who are on the circuit. And I wonder too if people get a little overwhelmed with the thought of reaching out to folks. How do
Uh,
you do you have someone make phone calls? Do you just go online and do the research and find who the companies are that might want to collaborate with you that are aligned to your business? How did you do that?
Yeah, you mentioned an important word 2 seconds ago, research. I identify the companies or brands, businesses, whether they be small local businesses or large companies. I go on and identify them first. Here's my dream sponsor list. Here's the companies I want to partner and collaborate with. I write them down. So I've got the list. Then I spend a little bit of time researching them on social media, the website. I listen to some of their, if they've been on media or if they have a YouTube channel, and I read their press releases. Now, you're going to love this, Veronica, because you know about press releases and getting in touch with media. It can be hard. And press releases always give you a contact number
They
for the
do.
and
They do.
is that the sponsor decision maker? No. But you can call that person if you can't find the person and say, who do I talk to in your organization? And I've actually done that many times, called the person on a press release saying, I'm looking to get in front of a person. And they always say, well, why? Because they're sort of going to help gatekeep.
Sure.
And then when I share my project, they're like, oh, I want to be in on that call too, because they're thinking there's a real communication angle here for our
That's right.
company if we got involved. So what's really important to know when we're thinking about sponsorship, we've got to research them. And there's two reasons we do this. First of all, it's about confidence building. You're absolutely right when you said earlier, do people kind of, they get overwhelmed with that. The reach out is uncomfortable for a lot of people. And so that is where they stall. That is where they stop. They do the research and they never pick up the phone, or I use LinkedIn actually to get in touch with sponsors. And what I want to say to shift that perspective, it's just a conversation. The people that you're talking to about sponsorship, this is just their job. And they're
That's right.
people too. They have dogs or cats, they have children or not. They have a life outside of their work. And if you can think about the fact they are just people and this is simply a conversation, um, I think most entrepreneurs are good at this. They have to be in conversation about their business. It's just one other conversation. And the key in that first conversation is to learn as much about that sponsor brand as you can. You're asking a lot of open-ended questions like who, what, where, when, why, and how. The goal is to hear what's important to them, what their marketing goals are, how they're trying to get in front of their audience. And that is one of the keys why they might say yes to you, is that they want to be in front of your audience. That's one of
Right.
the driving forces. The more you learn about the sponsor, the easier it is for you on the other end of the phone to hear the synergies, the common ground, how their need might be fulfilled by your project or your services or your audience.
Yes, absolutely. That makes complete sense. Because when there is an alignment, then and there's absolutely an opportunity to be had. And I
Yeah.
have been on the other side of the desk, and I have looked for opportunities that are going to get us in front of families in particular. When our target audience, where I used to work in banking, and
Yeah.
starting kids with children's savings account was huge to me. So if that opportunity had come across my desk, I absolutely would have bought books from you, been the sponsor, and then maybe even attended the event so that I
Right.
could pass out our little goodies that had the rulers and
Right.
pencil and compass in it with my bank logo on it.
Exactly.
Yeah, that
Exactly.
makes complete sense. Now, the more technical part of that, what does it look like? When do you set up contracts? Is that something people need to be thinking about? How does that work?
Well, the technical piece in sponsorship is going to look different depending on the sponsor, who it is. I'll give you an
Okay,
example. My clothing sponsor, my hair sponsor, my printing sponsor, these were all colleagues. And we didn't have a formal contract. In many cases, it was a verbal, I guess you could say it's still a contract, but it was a verbal
sure.
agreement. In other cases, it was an email exchange. You're going to do this, I'm going to do this, by when and how. But the businesses that I partnered with that were at a higher level, the motorhome, for example, definitely there was a legal contract that was written up. And so it's a way to understand this, that the bigger the brand, the probably the more in depth the contract will be. And
Gotcha.
a lot of them have their own contract that they use. The motorhome company had their own contract. The telecommunications company that we worked with had their own contract, and they just gave that to us. Really important, if you're being sent a contract, get it reviewed by a lawyer. Far
Yeah.
too many people sign contracts that it sounds good, but when you don't understand the legal implication of things, yeah, you're held accountable to that anyhow. We had our contracts reviewed by a lawyer, and we're able to add a few things in that also supported us. And the contracts, when you are having a written contract about sponsorship, what it really covers is what the sponsorship is arrangement. Is it financial? Is it in kind? Is it both? So all of that will be spelled out. If there is an exchange of money, products, or services, that how that will be done will be spelled out. Timelines, what happens if deliverables can't be met. All
Sure.
of that is spelled out. Many of your listeners will have contracts that they've seen that are similar to that for their products and services.
Makes complete sense.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you know when you're ready? And I ask because we've got a lot of listeners who are still in the corporate space, who are maybe looking at transitioning to
Right.
online or maybe have side hustles. And
Yeah.
then we also have listeners who are developing, growing their entrepreneurship business, and they're not quite sure if they're ready. How do you know
Yeah.
someone's ready to start collaborating and engage in some sort of sponsorship opportunity?
I always say to people, start sooner than later, because
Ah,
sponsorship can be a bit of a process. This is why I love it when entrepreneurs or people who have the side hustle that are looking to move out of corporate, when they start working on even the research in the background, starting to list out the sponsors, doing the research, so that when you're ready, you understand the brand enough to get on that phone call. The sponsors that are in kind, like your clothing, your hair, your printing, those you can start to work on sooner when you have some kind of a relationship, whether that relationship be a transactional relationship, like I don't know Mr. Visa, but I pay Mr. Visa money every month, or I don't know the telecommunications company other than the people that work at the local dealer, but I don't know the people, but I'm in a transactional relationship with my telecommunications company because I pay the money every month. When you start to look at where you spend money and where you shop and the products you use and love, those would be ones that you could start to work on sooner and later, and build your relationship with them, because it is a relationship, and then start moving towards how can we partner, collaborate, what could sponsorship look like. And I just say, get started, get started with something, identifying your dream sponsors, listing them out, doing the research, building the relationship, that because that's the piece that takes the time, and without it, sponsorship doesn't work. Otherwise, you run into the same mistake that most sponsorship seekers are making. They don't do the research, they don't build the relationship, and they simply pick up the phone and say, I've got this great project, you'd be a perfect sponsor. And the answer is no, because sponsors are saying, how do you know I'd be the
right,
perfect sponsor?
right.
You don't know anything about me yet.
Right, right. I mean, you need to have some sort of metrics. And, again, having been on the other side when I was in the banking business, I wanted to be able to articulate to my VP how effective our sponsorship dollars went. And so that
Yes,
makes a lot of sense.
yes, yes.
Mhm. So
And
I
then I'm
love,
going to add one more thing that would
please,
be
please.
helpful for your folks in terms of where do we get started. The other where do you get started is to be super, super clear on who your audience is,
Yeah.
being able to describe them. Because when you think about when you were with the bank, you had a very specific audience you were looking to get in front of. You described families, and you knew who your audience was. Families that had children in school, for example. The clearer you are on the audience, the easier it is for the sponsor to say, yes, this is a fit, or it's not really a fit. And sometimes they'll try and figure out how they could make it a fit. When you don't know your audience, sponsors are listening to you talk about your services, product, or program, but they can't sort of say, oh, we could fit in there.
Yeah. Yeah. And this question's been nagging at me just because I'm intrigued. Your close sponsor, what's in it for them? I mean, did you give them credit somewhere? How did you articulate that they were your sponsor?
At the
Asking
time,
for a friend.
Yes, yes. That when I started with that sponsorship, at the time I was doing a lot of work in that community where the clothing store was in the city, Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And that was where the clothing sponsor wanted to get in front of, because she knows people are not going to travel 3 hours to her store. She needs to look at local community. And I happen to speak at a lot of events in the local community for women audiences. And the return for her was that I would talk about Glenda, not saying I'd like to thank my clothing sponsor, Caprice Consignment, because nobody listens to that and it doesn't actually
Sure.
add value. What I would do is I would talk to Glenda about being a business owner or leading a team or values, whatever the presentation topic was about, resilience. And then I would interview my sponsors beforehand and I would weave a story about them
Ah,
into my presentation. I'll give you an example. When I was talking at one presentation about customer service, I would say, let me give you an example of a lady named Glenda who leads this incredible team that can't wait to come to work today. Why can't they wait to come to work? Well, Caprice Consignment has got such incredibly strong values. They engage team, they recognize team, and this is why. So if I was to say, Glenda, what are your top 5? Here's what Glenda would say. And I kind of weave that story as part of my content in there. And
brilliant.
then that's the way to
Mm,
do it, because people are like, oh, I like her style. I like this. And then in my handout packages at the back, I put a special thanks. I'd like to thank the people that I shared a case study about: Glenda, Caprice Consignment, or Deb, Verve Salon and Spa. And there's information in there about them. And of course, people would always say, oh, I love your dress. Where'd you get it? Oh, let me tell you where. I happen to have a business card for you. And I would just happily promote them.
yeah. No, that makes complete sense. I Charmaine, I cannot tell you how exciting this has been, all the ideas that I have, just going off, because this is a huge part of what nonprofits do.
Yes,
And, I've spent many years volunteering with Girl Scouts, many years volunteering with Education Foundation. So that this is a language I know, but it never occurred to me that entrepreneurs and small
right.
businesses could use the same model. So very, very excited. How do you work with people? How do you support your clients, and how can people learn more about working with you?
Thank you, Veronica. We have a number of training programs. We actually have a number of free programs on our website, raiseadream.com, and people can go there, download some of the video trainings. We have a free ebook that actually explains the 7-step model, and I talked about a couple of those steps today. And then we also work with clients on a one-to-one, a mentoring basis, where we walk clients right through the process of creating their own sponsorship program, helping them seek the right contact people for them to reach out to, helping them create the scripts for the conversation, basically walking them through the process. And then we often hold events like webinars right now, and live events as well, to train people. Because what I do know to be true is that when you understand sponsorship, this is why I say just do something after
Sure.
listening to this
Right.
today. Because even if it's like read one of our blogs, but just start thinking about sponsorship, because once you start to think about relationships with these possibilities, you never look at relationships the same way again.
Absolutely. It makes complete sense. Folks, if you have not written it down, it's eraserdream.com. If you're listening on the podcast, the link is in the show notes. Charmaine, you have been fabulous. The information you have given is just fantastic. And I know so many people are going to benefit from you being on and sharing your
Oh,
expertise. I can't thank you enough.
thank you, Veronica.
All right, everybody, that's it. I hope you took notes. I took plenty of notes. Trust me. In fact, I'm going to go back and rewatch, because there was a couple of things I wanted to make sure I captured. I have lots of family who could, and friends, Facebook family and friends, entrepreneurs who can use this information, because there's a lot of different ways to build on relationships. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. Charmaine really touched on it heavily. It's about relationships and nurturing them. So your visibility strategy can include sponsorships, collaboration, as long as they're always built on authentic relationships. So take heed, make sure you listen to the opportunities that exist. Don't let them pass you by, because there's a lot of different ways to grow your visibility strategy. All right, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Saturday Soundbites. I know I did. If you're listening on the podcast, make sure you hit subscribe. We don't want you to miss any episodes. If you're watching on the replay, hashtag replay, so Charmaine and I can go back and connect with you, and thank you for engaging with us and answer any questions you might have. So with that, I am sending you lots of positive energy and light.